That's right. So we're all set? Okay. I'd like to call to order the Shelburne Planning Commission on today, Thursday, September 14th. The first item on the agenda was a potential group photograph, but I'm going to assume that we will push that off until we get a full contingent. We're getting closer. This is the most people I think we've seen in a little while. All right, the second item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
All right, moved by Dick, seconded by Kate. The next item is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting.
You don't get to vote?
Huh?
You don't get to vote?
On approval of the agenda? All in favor of approval of the agenda?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you.
Such an easy step to forget.
It is. I'm not running on a ton of sleep right now. All right, so the next item is approval of the minutes, and motion to approve the minutes, and then we discuss, correct? All right, motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
All right, moved by Andrew, seconded by Dick. Any comments? I did go through them, and I didn't have anything obvious. Are there any other comments from anybody else? Nope. All right. Do we need another motion to actually approve, or we've already approved? We
You
just
made a
make-
motion and
So now we just take the vote. All in favor of approving the agenda?
Aye.
All right. Yeah, the minutes. Told you sleep is a problem. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
every time we have to, she says something that's about parliamentary procedure, we have to pay her extra, so it's like,
First on task.
I'm kidding. but She's no parliamentarian here.
All right. Any disclosures relating to any potential conflicts of interest? It'd be the wrong time to joke about a kickback about parliamentary notes and stuff. Okay, next item is open to the public, and not seeing anybody. I think we're fair to move on to the next item, which is the Housing Subcommittee had put together the pretty good packet. I forgot off the top of my head, what was just the housing brochure? Is that how we're referring to it?
Yes, that's how they're referring to it.
Okay. I suppose with nobody here to walk through it, I did look through it. I don't know if we wanted to do a quick review, or is the idea comments?
If I can interject.
Absolutely.
I think this is the second or third time when the material's been shared. The housing group really sounds like they would love whatever comments they can get from folks. And so I guess the first question I would ask is maybe the toughest, and that is, have people really had a chance to look at it? And do you have comments? Because if you do, that's great, and we should go through it. If that wasn't the case, then what I was going to say is that doing a brief overview, just getting people to orient themselves to it, and then talking about it at a future meeting is A-OK too. The committee was perhaps going to send some representatives, and them knowing that Jamie was not going to be here, I think they were just thinking that, well, if it doesn't happen tonight, it could happen at a future meeting. But if there are comments that I think the group should go through it, I'm happy to project, and so everybody can see what we're talking about.
Yeah, it might be good just to do a quick run through and address any comments that people do have.
I had a few from just reading it this week.
And my main comment was the last time that we went through this, I think that there was a bit of structural, and there were some updates that needed to be made, and a lot of that, it looked like, got taken care of. So that's really good. I think there's a lot of really good information in here, but it probably would be good to just do a quick, maybe not all of the allocated time, but we can accept some comments, and then maybe that'll frame any questions we may have for the subcommittee for the next review. Do we actually need to project it? We all have it,
Well,
so
it can be
it
picked
would
up
be-
as part of the video, so.
that's fair.
I mean, one thing I noticed right off the bat, this link here, when you go to the map, they talk about instructions, and when you go to the map, that's a broken link file. So you can't find the instructions, which, I mean, it's still not that hard to figure out, but that's certainly something that would be helpful for anybody who, you know, it's a call to click here to figure out how to use this, and then you click on it and nothing, it's a 404.
There is a correct link that does work, and this issue came up when someone else in a different committee had asked about it. So there is a link that works, and so I know that they can use the correct link. It's not like the website is broken.
Yeah. No, I mean, it goes to just a file that doesn't exist, so someone just needs to change it to the right URL.
So we can note that feedback. And that's the one on that first page after this, right? I think the link that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, they call it out here, please
Yeah.
visit this for information, and then
Gotcha.
when you actually go to the map, there's a thing that says, you know, click here for. And there's actually like a little information button on the site as well that also goes to the same bad link.
Yeah, it's, I'm not gonna be able to remember it or guess it. I don't know that it's been indexed, but.
I really think it's very helpful, this housing by year built information. When, the final version, will this be able to be a bit more dynamically understood on the online?
And that's what's cool, and the instructions would be nice because
Yeah.
the one thing you can figure out is you can play this as a movie, basically.
Okay.
And click through a timeline. So this,
Wow.
you can't see it here, but yeah, it's very dynamic.
Oh, great.
You can turn layers on and off. I mean, it's just, I would have liked to have gotten the instruction file just to figure out what else I could do, but
Yeah.
what I could figure out, it was very cool. I mean, basically starts at 1900, so you get to see everything that existed at that point, and then it jumps forward in about 10-year increments.
Nice.
And so you can kind of either play it and it
So
moves, or
this-
you click.
This is the link that works.
Yeah.
This is what the product actually was.
Well, then, usually when you come in, then something popped up too and just said, you know, if you want help, or if you click on that little eye, it says check out this information page, and if you click on that, that's where you get the
Okay.
broken link.
Oh, it's to a PDF. Wow.
Correct. Which is just instructions, I think, on how to, you know, use the layers and things.
Is that little sort of clock icon, how you
Correct.
look at things over time?
Yep.
As general feedback, it's clear that a lot of time has been put into this, and there's a lot of really good information.
Yeah, so you can either play it, or it's hard to see on that, but there's little hash marks, you know, every centimeter or so across the screen, and you
That's
can
really
just click on
nice.
each one and
Great.
see the explosions in the 70s, and then again in the, you know, 90s and aughts.
And I had a question about that, like, was that degrowth after 70s, what caused that? Like, why did that decline in growth happen? Was it like the space constraints or zoning regulations? What was going on?
What year was that?
I mean, so if you look at like 70s is the high mark of, the largest number of homes were built in
Things slowed
70s.
down.
Yeah,
Definitely, we caught our breath.
right. So there's not much space left? Or is it more like conservation strategy that's going on?
No, I think just growth went great, it was just wild in the 70s, and it slowed down. Either we had a slowdown in the economy, or it wasn't caused by lack of land or lots.
Yeah, I think the thing to think about is that, you know, this, Shelburne is part of a regional housing market. We're not, the tail is not wagging the dog. The dog is the dog. So we have to look at what's been happening in the region and what's been happening in the state. And, you know, over the last 50 years, there's been a lot of growth in particular times, and what we're seeing in Shelburne is really a reflection of what's going on in the larger area. But I would agree with Dick, it's not a function of land constraints. In the main, the land use policies haven't been so significantly modified that they will drive how much development.
So is it like basically IBM, boom, see growth, like
I think that.
trace the business market?
Is that the
Well,
correlation?
The neighborhood where I happen to live,
Yeah.
out here where Esson lives, that was a development that was created as IBM was getting its feet on the ground in Vermont.
Right.
So, these dots are, in a sense, a reflection of that. My guess is that Beaver Creek was happening a little bit later, but is a similar type of development. But anyway, my point is just that for clues, think about the regional economy in the state.
In 1980, we had 15% interest rates.
Yeah. No, I was just wondering whether there were any lagged effects of Act 250, like where kind of like came into on board in like mid-70s, and then people started to kind of like feel the effects of that in terms of like permitting process and just.
So, and then I just had like some really ticky-tack data question, but I don't know if that should just go to them, but like, some math that didn't quite add up, so I was curious what I was missing.
Which pages do you?
Well, it's just like total owner-occupied housing units. In 2015, there was 2,299, total renter-occupied 683, total housing units is 3,270, but if you add 2,299 and 683, you get 2,982. So there's about 300 housing units that aren't accounted for there. I don't know if that's like Wake Robin, other housing unit types that they aren't renter, they aren't owner, they're.
Yeah, to tag on to that, I had a question about Wake Robin. Was it considered a rental, or is it considered?
I don't believe that it's.
It said, well, it's a mix, right? Because it says units in assisted living facilities are considered to be housing units, however, units in nursing homes are not. So part of Wake Robin would be housing units, and part of it would not, depending on which level of care you're getting.
Yeah, the short of it is that I think we want to draw the attention of the committee to the areas that you're seeing things and let them know. I don't know that any of the units in Wake Robin are classified as assisted living units. I'm not sure that they are.
I worked with them when I was head of the school. We worked with them, and they definitely have 3 levels of care.
Levels of care that are offered.
Yeah, but some are, houses that you live in by yourself completely independently to then sort of assisted to full on, like you're in the unit and you got full on care. So I would guess they blend across those categories.
Yeah, it's a little bit different than an establishment where they'll have capacity in the institution. They'll have, Shelburne Bay, 54 units of assisted living in
Right.
the new building, and then
Right.
whatever number that are the not. And I think with Wake Robin, it may not be classified quite the same way because the level of care that's provided varies depending on your need.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we just need them to investigate it.
Okay. But anyway, again, there's
Some math questions.
there's other types of housing than owner occupied and renter occupied, so I think that's probably what that delta is. But I just, started adding up numbers that didn't seem to match, so I was curious why.
Yeah, I think, and just one other speculation is that they've thrown together a lot of different data sources in
Yeah.
this, so.
Right. Yeah, and then I have other small ticky-tack ones going through where they talk about percentage increases, and then the next half of the sentence talk about units increase, but don't give the correlated percentage increase as well. So it's a little bit of an apples to oranges. It'd be great if they did. And then other times they talk about things being in the quote residential district. And I wasn't clear what that term means. Does that mean residential pieces in growth area 1 and 2? Or what does the term residential district apply to?
We have a district that's called the residential district, which is the bulk of the area inside sewer service area, but outside the village. we have something called residential, we have something called village residential, I believe, because I
Right.
remember them giving them the zoning maps.
Yeah, but they talk about that in the, so in the core village, you've got village residential, and then, in the rural district and in the growth area 2, you have pieces of growth area 2 are defined different things. Some of growth area 2 is residential. Then they mention 58% of the town's housing units are in the residential district. But it's unclear what residential district they're talking
I
about.
think they meant growth area 1 and 2.
That's what my note was like, is this the residential chunks of growth area 1 and 2 combined? But again, it wasn't clear what, there's sort of terms, the term residential is used 2 or 3 different ways. So I may be dumb, but I couldn't understand what they were trying to imply.
That's a good comment. Because for a lot of these things, and it's similar to you, I didn't go in and really add them up, but some of those numbers I was using more as ballpark conceptual, but it's
Yeah,
true.
well, I was too, but then I was like, well, let me just add this plus this, and it didn't work. I was like, oh, now I got to ask a question.
Which
Yeah.
is great, and I think maybe even if there are multiple sources, and that's the key to that, having a note to say that if the numbers don't completely add up, it's due to this. But your point
Right.
about the how residential is defined is certainly important.
Yeah, and the other one I was specifically was in that section D. It says, where is housing taking place? The end of that top paragraphs, they talk about, Shelburne had from 2000 to 2010, Shelburne had a 13% housing unit increase of 344 units. Then the next chunk of time is 2010 to 2016. The number of housing units has increased by 227, an average of 38 units per year, but there's no correlating percentage. And I was just curious, because that's sort of a data point that would be like, okay, is that, yeah, how do I relate that to that? Like, you can't without the same percentage.
It's a great call out.
You want me to just summarize my questions and email them to you? I mean, what's the best way to get it to the?
Yeah, I would say you can send them to me, or you can
Okay.
send them directly to Ron Bouchard, but I'm
Okay.
happy to
Yeah.
take them from everybody and hit him with just one email.
Is this on the website now, or is it on the regional planning?
If you're talking about the brochure itself, I don't believe that it's been posted, this PDF file, because that's what they're trying to get the comments for. The housing website is online,
On CCRPC?
CCPRC, ccrpcvt.org. But the URL that's up here, Gail, is,
I can't see.
okay, it's map.ccrpcvt.org/Shelburne Housing.
I just want to compliment them on the job they did. I think it's phenomenal, the amount of data they put together. They probably aren't exactly looking for that, but it's a pretty nice piece of work.
I second that. It's really cool history for a guy like me who wasn't here for many of these decades to sort of be able to see the trends and what happened.
Oh, the trends part is fantastic. Really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really interesting, weird little data points too, right? So like the median price in 2010 is $298, in 2011 it's $394, and then it goes down to $326. Like, what happened in 2011? The median price jacked $100,000.
So I had a comment about that, the price issues, like, I wasn't sure like whether those were nominal prices or those were inflation adjusted prices.
The number of units was,
based on the actual sales.
vastly reduced that year.
What were?
I believe that year, that the number of units
Yeah, but it's the prices are being, say,
were reduced.
the prices that we see, for example, on page 12, are those reflective of the price of, in the year that the household was sold, or was it kind of like inflation adjusted to say all the prices are 2010 prices?
Yeah, if they haven't said what year the dollars are in, I'm not sure.
They haven't. And so I couldn't find that information.
It doesn't say that many houses.
Yeah, it may be just, it may be, you know, it's the data for the year, in the year, because they're comparing
I
them
definitely
across
don't think it's
Shelburne.
inflation adjusted.
Right, because if you do not, if those data sets is not inflation adjusted, you cannot make these kind of claims that those
Over
are,
time, right, yeah.
the prices are going up or down, because it's,
Yeah, they were trying to do too much of that.
Out of curiosity, was there a time for a formal delivery in mind for something like this? Or is this just more it's an iterative process, we're working through it?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't believe that they had a specific deadline assigned to them. I think they were hoping to do something so that it could be ready in time to help the planning commission as it works on the plan. There's no external deadline that's driving this. I think that the group wanted to complete the task, so they tried to crank it out, but.
so it would be great if they can kind of put the inflation adjusted prices kind of like, that would help the comparative analysis as opposed to just
Yeah.
nominal prices, because nominal prices kind of like do not account for these kind of inflation
Right.
deflators. And
Yeah. One of their members is Mark Brooks, who spends a lot of his work life dealing with this data, and so I don't know for sure that they're not. It's just not explicit. Like I said, in terms of the up and down vagaries, those could be, if they're based on the actual sales, just keep in mind, we're talking about not a lot of sales, and it's gonna depend on the stock.
yeah.
Yeah, Dick and I had a little side discussion, he was saying that 2011 was a year with limited stock, a lot of high-priced stock, and just, you know, it's a small data set. I mean, the cool thing about this, I think, is not necessarily even how it increases, but how we are relative to county and state. I mean, it would certainly be cool to see the inflation-adjusted piece, but I mean, I think the goal of that chart is really more, here's how do we relate to our close neighbors and then the wider set of neighbors. And that's pretty fascinating data.
Suggests that we are a community with great appeal.
Yeah, and remain so. And the growth numbers were interesting at the end, you know, that were, well, I guess the county is still of great appeal.
Yeah, I think it would be good to consolidate some of these comments, get it back to them for feedback, and then maybe have a formal session to then, with representatives to maybe talk through some conceptual things. Like one thing, there's a section renting in Vermont, and there's a lot of great numbers about the state. Doesn't really discuss Shelburne specifically, and maybe it doesn't need to. But when going through a report, if you're thinking this is a like about Shelburne, then we'd need to, I don't know, I guess it is state-based and then there's a county-based after they've been talking about Vermont or Shelburne.
Some of that data is just really hard to get.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's what they were finessing. So if there are more comments, maybe we can get them in the minutes. If there are not, then we just make the commitment. People will email them.
I
don't want to shut things down, but.
Yeah, no, we do have a lot in the next item. Yeah, a lot of mine, maybe to your point, Kate and Andrew, that there were a lot of interesting tidbits in there that kind of stood out, and it would be interesting to see how to either highlight those, contextualize things a little bit more, and maybe see if there's a flow that could be done in line with consistency, like just because, as you pointed out with some of the numbers, and there were some other areas where I felt like I was kind of jumping around and I wasn't quite sure of the specific context, but I love the theme, I like the content. I think this is going to be a really good asset to have. Were there any other specific comments to jot down for the notes now, or just
No.
you can?
Maybe on the median price, if it was not too difficult, was to put the number of sales in a column. That might,
Well, that's a great idea.
that
Jack.
might help
Yeah.
explain
Yeah.
the difference.
All right. If there are any other specific comments now, then we can submit what we have back to the committee and put it on a future agenda item.
Agreed.
All right. Then with that, we can move on to the comprehensive plan update. And we'll talk about two sections. The first one is energy. A lot of these edits were done prior to the last time we were going to discuss energy. And one of the hesitations I had from really trying to reorganize is I really wanted to get input from fellow commissioners on just the content that we have in here and then ideas around flow so that I can see if I was either on track or I can tailor the direction that I was thinking we could go in. As far as format of going through here, Dean, if you're going to present, I have, as long as it's the same document, I can.
If you want to edit on the fly, I was just going to pull it up.
Is it the one with the 6/15 date on it?
I'm sorry. It's been It's been a while since I've looked at it. I think it's this one that last edited the 10th of August. Is that right?
That would have been when. No, that can't be right.
That would have been at the last meeting.
Let me just check the last edits. I mean, if it was me, then that was probably it. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll pull it up and you'll be able to.
So, as we go through this, I don't know if I don't want to read this line by line or anything. I would first ask for anyone who had reviewed it, was there anything that stood out? And maybe we can, like, do we want to go page by page if anybody had comments in particular?
I have a few,
It impacts both.
The energy text that was prepared by the Regional Planning Commission has some material on transportation but then we move a little bit beyond and it does go to energy.
And, yeah, and it does jump around a little bit, and that's where I want to, some of the points, I want to see if there are people that are opposed to certain things being in there or feeling very strongly that other things need to be in there. That was the more focus is on content. From a organization of this section, there is transportation. It gets into streets, paths, public transportation, airports. Like there are different sections that way, and then it gets into energy. I don't know if ultimately we want to keep all of these things separated or consolidate them a little bit using the same content. So the focus today is more on the content itself. And do we just want to specifically do the energy one?
Well, I was just responding to Gail's comment because I think it kind of threw her that the headers in transportation.
it
So I'll
does.
start wherever you'd like.
I think just for the way the packet's organized, let's just start with transportation and we can flip through, and if there are key comments page by page, we can address those. Just to refresh everybody's memory, the main intent for this is that the state has set goals for having 90% of our energy needs being served by renewable resources by 2050, with an interim goal of 25% by 2025. And to that end, in order to achieve that, there are a lot of things that need to happen. In the last meeting, when most of us were here and Melanie was here, we were discussing everything from the need for increasing renewable power generation to reducing our power consumption and everything in between. So, so I guess with that, if we just page by page, are there any comments on page 1?
I think it could be kind of made a little bit pithier. I would suggest maybe just, like, for starters, taking out the second sentence. It might be nice if we could make it a little more interesting to read.
All right.
Second sentence in the first paragraph, you're saying, which was not something that was,
It just doesn't seem, sort of like a statement of the obvious.
Yeah, and a lot of the, I think for the most part, much of the black text is what's in the current plan and just not changed. So, yeah, I'll take that as feedback and I can work on something and then next time we can look at the
Okay.
revision.
Just a point of clarification,
Mhm.
for the blue in the second paragraph, was that added to fit better to the energy goal overall? What was the purpose of, was that an addition actually? That's my question.
That was added by Melanie to just reinforce what the state goals are, to add that into the transportation section. And this is, one of my thoughts on this whole thing is I'm not convinced that we need to have separate sections for everything. I don't know if we want to have an energy section of the plan that then includes transportation that then has subsections with its own section for energy. Like, we may just want to introduce the energy section as this is energy which contains these things. I'm assuming that what's in our packets is the way it's laid out in the plan today. So it would start with transportation and then we've peppered in some energy things and then we have an energy section after that.
yeah, energy does, it's close to the end, and there are many intervening chapters, and all that has happened is that she looked at the entirety of the plan, saw this transportation stuff, said, I'm gonna suggest that it's there, and this is just poured into one document rather than into two.
Right, so my initial focus is just on making sure we get the key points and the feelings of the commissioners in here, and then I can certainly spend a bunch of time just getting it organized. And Dean, I may just want to run some things by you around that as well.
Okay, and I'm going to acknowledge that Judy is here, Judy Raven, who's been a participant in an energy group in Shelburne, and you were copied. I'm just trying to remember who got which emails, and so in terms of people who could be involved in supporting you or you supporting Judy and some other folks in Shelburne could be helping out.
Yeah, and I saw that today. From an agenda perspective, would that be something we put under commissioner questions, comments, or other business in terms of generating a subcommittee? Or is that something we discuss now?
I think that it probably should be as a separate agenda item, but I think it would be good to just let people know that part of the reason that it might come up is because of their possible involvement.
Sure. So there, and I saw that note today. There's an idea to create an energy subcommittee and have some resources on it, similar to what the housing subcommittee did in terms of compiling data and really backing up a lot of stuff that's in this section. I think a lot of the content that we have in here is great. One of the big missing chunks is the data to back it up. And I don't know if that would actually go in this section specifically, or if we'd add it as an appendix, because when you get into data and historical, you can end up making your document much bigger. So that wouldn't be something that we could initiate today. That wouldn't need to be something where we have a formal agenda item on a future.
I kind of think it should be, that it would be better for it to be addressed as an agenda item that says something about creating the energy subcommittee in the same way it was done with the housing committee.
So if we were to do that, and I'm mostly mindful of time and recognizing when we need to have certain things in place, and most subcommittees, I think, meet monthly. So if we were, just thinking out loud, if we were to wait a couple of weeks and then have on an agenda item to establish a subcommittee that then starts meeting monthly, we're
Way behind.
not helping ourselves out with
Yeah,
time.
I get it, totally.
Could we discuss it? and just have it not be an action item, would that be appropriate?
Sure, but I think one of Jason's point is that you want to bring that up now as part of this substantive discussion? Do you want to do it a little bit later?
Right. I mean, we can ask the question now, I suppose. Are there any thoughts,
Reason
pro or
not
con?
to.
Yeah, any reason not to do a
I don't have any
energy
reason not to.
subcommittee?
No, based on how incredibly helpful the housing subcommittee has been in sort of giving us direction and insight, and this is such a huge area for us to focus on, I think, and Judy and others are apparently willing, I think. Conceptually,
Conceptually.
yes.
Hypothetically.
In a
speaking.
discussion sort of sense, not an action sense. Why not? What's not to like?
I wish I had known a week ago.
Right.
Why didn't you send that email a week ago, Judy?
No, I don't know.
All right, so the vibe is positive as far as that goes, and is part organizationally and as far as ethics rules and that sort of thing goes, is there any reason not to have conversations around that?
Around the creation of, concerning the creation of this committee?
Not
Or-
necessarily that, but say, for example, hypothetically, if Judy's really interested in looking into some of these things, would there be any issue with us communicating around the things that we're looking at doing and getting the ball rolling on
I don't think so.
any of that?
Do
Okay.
we need to maybe proposition how many people we're talking about on this? Would it be 3 or 5, or should we,
Is,
Three, four,
yeah.
five?
I don't know how many people want to
The
be
housing
involved.
group has 5 members, I believe.
So potentially 5.
So potentially 5, and do we think we could get 5?
May I respond?
Sure.
Well, I'm not an expert, but I have an interest and a passion and some experience. And I think I might be able to help identify a couple of other people who may have the expertise and the knowledge and who may be willing to do this, especially since it would probably be, I assume, kind of a short-term task, at least that part of it that you're talking about right now. And if you need people to meet more than monthly, which it sounds like you do, I think you'll have a pretty good chance of getting people to do that since they're not taking it on for, you know, a 10-year period or something. So, and other people may be able to help, of course, identify some people with expertise too. And I think it's possible. I think the interest is probably there.
Yeah, my initial response when I saw that idea floated is I'm 100% for it. I think it would be great. My big concern was just time and how we pull it together, and in the interest of collaboration and that sort of thing, I would worry that just being able to collaborate through email and that sort of thing would violate the structure of committees. No. The hypothetical committee that would be created, right?
The person who lives, you know, at her address is the chair of the ethics committee, so.
So nothing bad can happen if I'm involved in it.
Fair enough.
But if you don't exist, there can't be a conflict, right?
It's not
Yeah.
existing, right.
Yeah. So,
And an alternative
Informal.
would, just to float a concept, could an alternative be to have interested citizens that could do research, provide information, and then as we're doing a review of a section, the public could be there to hear what's going on and be invited to comment if necessary? Or would we have to run that by?
The public can speak anytime.
Right.
If you're wondering, yeah, the public can speak. I wasn't sure if what you were saying is that the makeup of this group would be very, very ad hoc. You know, I think you're talking about, there'll be a group of people who we know will be productive.
Absolutely. It's just, yeah. All right. Well, we can formalize that on the next agenda, on the next meeting, and we could formalize a hypothetical subcommittee. And in the meantime, I would fully encourage anybody with interest to, yeah.
I think a lot of stuff can happen behind the scenes so that possible participants on this learn the things that would help them once they get appointed. because
There's
the
a lot of
chair,
expertise in this town too. I mean, I just was writing down 3 names of people I know. This is their work field. This is what they do, energy and energy efficiency. They consult nation and worldwide, and they're experts in the field. Like, we've got the talent in this town. I think to the point that if we're saying, hey, we need your help for a short-term stint to help us put together the best possible town plan, I could probably twist some arms, you know, but I don't know that they would sign up for a 10-year commitment, but maybe a, 10-week one.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. So I think with that, it seems that there's no reason not to hypothetically do that, but we could put it on the next meeting to discuss that formally.
And the goal would be to basically provide a great deal of direction and advice on how to write this section of the town plan. Is that what we're thinking? What would be the task of this advisory group? Or would it continue beyond? I guess we can discuss that.
Yeah, I think, well, a big thing that will be needed is to provide, similar to what the housing subcommittee did, where you can have, essentially to make a case to support what the energy section is trying to do and why Shelburne is taking the approach it's doing to solve or to meet the needs that the state has laid out. And I really think that it's, I mean, as far as organizing a document and getting concepts in it and that sort of thing, I'm good with that. I would love assistance, but I think that the bigger challenge is going to be there's a lot of data out there, and what data do we want? How do we put it in there? And how do we have this section make a proper case? Because there's going to be pushback
I think the
in
other thing
general.
would be what's feasible, right? So writing a plan, to your point, that's realistic, backed up with the best possible science and data, and that's feasible, because you can claim you're going to get to, 25% by 2025 and, have no actual way to get there. So it would be interesting to have some people really look at it and say, okay, yes, this is the way it would, these are ways it would be doable.
And Kate, you raised some really good points during the last discussion around, well, we don't need to drop everything we're doing and then take every available inch of space and put solar panels on it. Like, that's not it. Let's focus on how we're structured. Can we reduce the amount of single-use transportation? Can we increase cycling, walking, that sort of thing?
Except we don't get credit for it, apparently.
Right. There's still an element of doing the right thing. But to be able to have the numbers to back it up, to make the cases for the approach taken, and that can really, I think Melanie even mentioned it, that we can, as long as we have a path to get to what the state will take, what we're looking for ultimately is substantial deference, right?
Well, and it's also, she also said that right now, the state doesn't recognize that, but that could change. There's
Right.
been, it's been brought to their attention that this should matter. So we can anticipate that at some point it will count.
And I think it'd be great as a town to be proactive toward that. And
That it will count before 2025, which is
Right.
what matters, right?
that is, yes. All right, so I've got comments on that first paragraph on the first page. Do we want to? And
I have a comment on number 2.
please.
You know how I feel about incentives. I would rather put that we just implement a requirement that private development of walkways that connect to the public path and trail network be part of the subdivision or part of their plan, rather than try to figure out a way to create incentives that may or may not appeal to one developer, and just say that, it's a requirement that walkways connect to public paths and trails.
That was exactly my note that I wrote down too. I mean, it's sort of wishy-washy. I would much rather say require private development walkways that connect. And rec goes down below in number 5.
Yeah, I had requiring.
Yeah.
So instead of the strive to create.
No, sorry. Well, in
Right.
recommended actions,
Number 5.
those two are the kind
Oh,
of
gotcha.
same thing.
Yeah, requiring the easements as opposed to asking. Just other towns do it.
establish the practice
Very
of
much that way.
requiring, you know,
What number, where are you? Number 2, if we wanted to just say require private development of walkways, so delete the first part of that.
Yeah,
We're not
and then-
messing around anymore. We
and
just
then
have to do it.
below, under recommended actions, number 5,
5, okay.
something similar, so establish the practice of requiring subdividers to grant easements, et cetera.
All right. Nothing else on that page? We go on to the next one?
Yeah.
Actually, I think
had a
that
comment,
brings
Oh,
that.
sorry.
Sorry.
Yep, please.
So I think one of this notion of these complete streets is kind of like missing from the recommended actions. There is this, like, even if you link with what we were talking about, the housing, the Vermont is like, especially in Shelburne, like the aging population trend is reflected in Shelburne more strongly than the rest of the Vermont. This notion of like complete streets is where you have space for, on the streets, not just for cars, but also for bike lanes, but also separately for the pedestrians. And this complete streets notion is kind of like gaining a lot of momentum in many sustainable, resilient communities, kind of like applications. And I think we should kind of like probably insert something about complete streets as one of the recommended actions where, you know, like the aging population need to be able to walk, but it's also linked with obesity, but also many other aspects of where the road design is kind of like under the current national highway standards is kind of like just focused on the single occupancy vehicles, which is the major problem that's identified, but we're not really changing the design standards to permit complete street idea. And I think there's a lot of potential that where the Planning Commission can do to change those standards where the complete streets can be kind of like prioritized as one of the ways to tackle single occupancy vehicle problem.
And that's a good point. Actually, it didn't occur to me that it was missing here because we've used that term in a lot of other areas, but I think that was more in the regulations, not so much the plan.
Yeah, it's kind of hidden on the top of the second page in terms of, it's like an either or rather than an and, you know, it's bicycle lanes or a hard surface multi-use path. So it's the underneath recommend actions, number 6, the 2 bullets. But I think that seems like the logical place to roll that into a complete streets description.
I think the only problem is
It's an
that,
and instead of or.
you know, that this is relying on LOS, level of service, which is increasingly viewed by many as a very inflexible and perhaps outmoded way to achieve more livability. So I just would be very cautious about tying ourselves to something that is, complete streets comes with a lot of baggage, which I think we should probably unpack and understand before we know what that is. Like, for example, a hard surface multi-use path of at least 8 feet. I mean, we had a lot of people on Bay Road just get incredibly angry about the lack of context sensitivity. So I think I 100%, 200% agree with advancing this. I just think we need to figure out a finer grained approach that works for our community. And I'm not sure that first of all, complete streets, my understanding is that is something that the select board would adopt that as a policy, right? And that comes with certain, you're tied into certain ways of doing things if you do that.
Happy to jump in and explain stuff on complete streets, but I would just remind you that this discussion is about energy, and I know that there are energy implications of the street system, but I think some of the discussion, at least, is really the discussion you should have when you're talking about the transportation element as the transportation element rather than energy, because that's what I thought this was about.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a fair point. So we should
Okay.
really that whole section. So you had this transportation section in there because it had a.
Because she has got some edits in it. It's not so that you rip into transportation, because then I would have been telling other folks, you need to be there because they're talking about the transportation section. It's really,
Like reduction of single occupancy vehicles.
I totally
So
get it.
single
That's-
occupancy vehicle on per capita basis causes the most amount of energy.
Right,
So if you want to reduce that, you have to think about the street design.
yep. And so it's the proverbial, are you going to move the big rocks first? Or are you going to move the little rocks? And so I'm just saying, you're supposed to.
And I'm curious to hear what's the baggage, like what do you think is the baggage that comes with a complete street
Yeah,
solution?
I think it would be definitely something we should probably really delve into, because I think we just need to be, we need to know what we're getting into. The state is not necessarily super evolved in how they allow you to meet certain goals. And I can just anticipate that, character of the area is something that's very, very important to a lot of people. And so I think we need to find a way that achieves multi-mobility in a way that supports character of the area. And so the ideal way to do that would be to really redo our public works standards, which is, I know we have to first do the town plan. So it's, but I'll try and get some information on that for you, so.
Yeah, I'm curious because there are many communities who have attempted this and tried this and it works pretty well. So
Yeah.
there's some successful stories as well.
But they probably
But-
have better public works standards than we do.
Well, they were innovative enough to basically take the lead.
Yeah.
Gail, did you have a question before?
I think it's probably better for the other discussion when we do full transportation. Had to do with connectivity between the required paths and transportation, so probably better for another
And
discussion.
then wrap stormwater in and all that stuff too, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for helping to avoid the rabbit hole. That is a good point. And we should, I'll note this as well because I've been looking at these sections for a while and I've got other notes that could take us in other directions for transportation as well.
So we're skipping this whole transportation section?
No.
And coming back to it at a later date?
The proposed edits, the edits that were proposed by Melanie are found at the very end she's got a header, I believe that was hers, the alternative fuel vehicles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and right before that.
And
there
then right
were-
before that, right.
Yeah.
So she talks about right, number 15 on is what was, and then you added the number 19, I think.
Right.
But I'm just so I'm clear though, the transportation stuff that we're gonna circle back to that.
Yeah, there will
At
be
a
an
later
entire
date.
discussion
Yeah, got
on
it.
transportation. Kate is the designated head for that discussion,
Right.
which will come up.
And
Yeah.
I'd love your help if maybe we can even do it together if you want. Sounds like it's sort of an area of great interest for you too. So-
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great, yeah.
So from an energy perspective, under recommended actions, those points 15 through 19 are things that were added to the transportation section and then the alternative fuel vehicles underneath it.
I wanted to add, or discuss adding busing somewhere. There's nothing about buses on here.
They're interesting.
Which buses?
The-
Town, regular bus transportation.
I thought there was a.
There
There might
is-
be later, but.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder if that's later in the energy section, but no.
What's the next, isn't the next section where it gets into public transportation?
She's got 10 and 11 that were identify challenges and opportunities for transit, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, that's starting to scratch at what you're getting at. So I think hold it until you get to the transit part.
Yeah, but I'll make a note because as far as transportation goes, that is certainly related.
It'd be nice if everything could be more integrated.
And that's it. I mean, because there's multiple sections involved here.
Yeah.
So if I appreciated that she added some energy-related items to the transportation section, and I was starting to. This is why I wanted to have the conversation first, Because I was starting to consolidate some stuff and look at energy purely as energy, but then that gets into some transportation things, and I didn't want to have the exact same stuff in both places. And do we maybe want to rethink what that whole section looks like? That's where I'm not really sure where we need to go. But calling things out, like from a transportation perspective, we want to make sure that things like public transportation are certainly included, buses being one of those, and they are in there. So maybe the consolidation effort can be later, and let's make sure we've got the key points. So keep calling them out.
Light rail.
Hyperloop.
Elon Musk.
Yeah. Shelburne to Burlington in 5 seconds.
Well, there is a section on rail transportation, so I'm assuming, I didn't see light rail in there either. Light rail meaning single cars or double cars or something.
Yeah.
Running back to Virgins and Middlebury, and we have a track out here that gets used 2 or 3 times a day.
That's a good point. I'll call myself that. I laughed when you said that, but that's completely legitimate. All right, so do we just want to skip to the energy section in general, and transportation, we can discuss the alternative fuel vehicles and that sort of thing then? Because that certainly is all transportation.
Yeah, the only thing I noticed in the alternative vehicle piece was what used to be number 2, I guess it's still number 2, and then EE, so it's like promote and seek grants to fund the installation of DC fast charging infrastructure. It just calls out strategic locations along major travel corridors and in transit hubs such as park and ride. I would think you need to add something, and also retail destinations, shopping destinations. You know, like, in my vision would be, I happen to drive an electric car, but the vision would be to have, you know, a charging station at the Shelburne supermarket. You know, places that people are, you know, going to be doing places of business or at restaurant, you know, some more places in the center of town that would potentially be a draw for those retail spots. And also, I mean, you're not going to do 99% of my charging at home. I don't need that stuff, but it's just a nice thing to know that it's there and could draw people coming through town might know on PlugShare, these various apps that, oh, Shelburne Supermarket has a level 2 charger. I'm going to stop, and then bam, they're spending money in Shelburne.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, that would be covered under strategic locations, but,
Well,
I mean,
just,
we
it
could add a
calls
comma
out,
and
you know,
use
transit
specific
hubs
examples.
and travel corridors, but not, I just want something specific, like, we should put some downtown in specific
Sure.
retail locations, or I don't know how the phrasing would be, but.
Yeah, absolutely.
For healthy living, I'm pretty sure the Tesla,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, setup they got.
I mean, between West Lebanon and Montreal, that was the only one for a long time. So you're gonna stop there and you're gonna spend some dough.
Mhm.
I'd suggest that you also want to look at tourism stops, because people tend to be there for a while, and it's a good place for them to be able to.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a charger at Shelburne Museum, the farms, you know, the supermarket, I mean, there's multiple places around town.
Yeah.
Teddy Bear has one already.
Artisan
There-
Village, we were supposed to get one at the Vineyard, it didn't show up, but.
Who
Yeah.
pays for them?
Depends how you want to do it. So Tesla has a destination charger plan where they'll basically donate the charger, not only their own, but also a J1172 or whatever it is. So it could charge a Bolt or you know, Leaf. And they'll often throw that in, and you're basically the site owner would be responsible for kind of providing the power and kind of keeping an eye on it and making sure it's still working. But Tesla's basically putting their money where the mouth is and giving it away. So you might have to do some electrical install.
Call Tesla.
And then, you know, Green Mountain Power is starting to push a little bit more, and there's other ChargePoint and other third-party vendors that, you know, might, I don't know how their economics work exactly, whether they're leasing. Yeah, you swipe a card, or you have a fob, or you have an account, and you're using an app that then knows, okay, you're at location X, and it'll fire it up.
Is that something the municipality would ever want to do? I mean, just even to encourage employees to,
Well, many years ago, John Adams had an electric car that he was driving, and he was charging. It was very old school, right out here near their fish pond. But I think that the town would be interested in that. I don't know if there've been any discussions down the other end of the hall about setting it up, but
I'm thinking of the new library, you know, I mean, that would be very kind of like hip
Yeah.
to incorporate something like that in with the new library, just saying.
And this would be another thing that could be of interest to a hypothetical energy subcommittee. Because if we can create these types of case studies or points of how a system would work, pros and cons, where the investment would come from, like the hits, if you have that information available, then it's easier to make a case versus just talking conceptually.
Yeah, and there's a nice call out somewhere in that section, but, you know, either, again, it might be incentives or something, but, yeah, the one right below F, you know, for new development, so that, you know, as a Harrington Village gets built now instead of then, you know, you would want to have one installed there, right? The hardest people to charge EVs are apartment or unit dwellers, right? Because I can put it in my garage and I'm good, but, you know, that those types of development should certainly, if not require them, have them. But even like small little cluster development, like I think of like McCabe's Circle, you know, across the street from the school, you know, you could have one in there for all those houses to kind of draw off of. Would be great for future development.
Which circles back to, it's 14.5 cents per kilowatt hour in Vermont. Electricity is very expensive. How are we generating the electricity? And I read a lot about wood chips, and, you know, 45% of homes in Vermont are still burning heating oil. Like, there needs to be more solar panels, and the state is not incentivizing people to get the panels enough.
Yeah,
Like, it's great to get these free chargers everywhere, but electricity has to be generated somehow, and nobody wants Ridgeline development, and
Yeah, I mean, Tesla's working pretty closely with Green Mountain Power, right? So there's a pretty screaming deal now to get the Powerwall 2. So it's like $15 a month for one, $30 a month for two. You know, looking at it, so I'll have two huge batteries in my house that I'm going to need to then also do solar. I mean, there are some incentives, but I agree. I would love to have more incentives to do it.
it's like a 14-year break even to get a new
Yeah.
Solar City roof put on,
Right.
paying upfront cash with all of the federal and state tax rebates. It's like the state's telling us you need to be energy efficient or reduce your emissions. Well, they're not helping. They're
Right.
not
No,
doing.
I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do it because
It's-
it makes me feel good. But I agree, the economics don't pan out as well as you want. But I mean, it's a pretty cool idea, right, with the Powerwalls, in the sense that now Green Mountain Power has a surge, right? They have a huge demand. They don't have to go to Ohio to a coal burning power plant. They can then suck some from my battery and your battery and your battery and your battery. So and there are some cool things that are starting to go in, but yeah, we're not
The
there.
big thing is that there are a lot of things that are changing all the time, which is where, from my perspective, it would be really helpful to have data to back things up and arguments for this, or to be able to do the math to say, hey, once, say, battery storage hits a certain price point, then that would be a time for, say, the municipality to investigate, well, if we get a, like if we put together a community solar thing with battery storage, we could support a lot of these initiatives, but right now it's not economically feasible with the existing regulatory environment and the way the subsidies are laid out.
For municipal vehicles too, right, your total cost of ownership is gonna be dramatically lower with an electric car going forward, right? So this car we have, there's no oils to change, right? You rotate the tires, and I mean, it's just the checklist of things you have to do. You know, again, you're not paying for gas, so something from a town standpoint, certainly municipal vehicles should look to be all. I mean, they call that out in here. Should all be hybrid or electric.
Yeah, there was a deal offered a year or two or maybe three ago that, it's just that the model electric vehicle that was.
Yeah, no, we're just.
But it's a lot has improved since
Yeah, we're
then,
just now cracking that barrier for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bolt's the first like mass-produced car that's affordable and, you know, really usable.
Yeah, but RPC has, I think, 2 or 3 that they use. And just very, very quickly, your comment about, you know, wanting data to support this, I think it's good to remind folks that some of it is data or it's modeling, and Melanie mentioned frequently that there is a lot of modeling that's been going on behind, and I think with a group of people dedicated to that, they can understand it, translate it, and put it into a chunk that could be the kind of thing that you're looking for.
Absolutely, and the interesting thing, particularly in that industry right now, is that those models are constantly changing because new technologies are coming out, new incentives are rolling out. maybe not with this administration, but, like, there's a lot of things that are in flux.
Just to follow up on the conversation that Andrew, I think like it would be good to have some kind of like feasibility study done of the suitability for installing these kind of chargers. And what would cost in terms of like the incentives that Tesla or Nissan Leaf are giving. How can we kind of like build local capacity to kind of like utilize those resources, but identify where those chargers should be prioritized through the municipal support, kind of like some kind of like technical capacity that can kind of like identify those spots, and we can prioritize where, for example, the library idea or coffee shop or, you know, like the other places where people hang out, or the tourist ideas. I mean, so there are different kind of like conflicting goals that could lead to different prioritizations, but I think like having some kind of feasibility study done about how much would it cost a municipality to install, say, 3 or 5 or 7 chargers and where they should be placed, that could lead to some practical kind of like action, but also some of these, like in the agenda item, you have those, for example, municipal grants or those other kinds of grants you can apply for. So some of those grants can be applied to by the town to kind of like do these kind of feasibility studies, kind of like identify where you want to place those.
Yeah, but it can also be, there's fast charging, there's, here, we'll get you to a certain amount in a short period of time.
So some places it wouldn't make sense.
All right, well, we also have, as part of this section, we eventually need to squeeze in rural area discussion as well, and we haven't actually hit the energy section yet. So,
What? Are we jumping ahead to energy?
we could, I just wanted the points that were put in, they're in a different color, just if there are any comments on them until we get to the energy section, but I'm happy to just recognize that those are put in and we can talk
One
later.
comment on number 18, this automatic vehicle location equipment for school buses. There was a really interesting article the other week in the Wall Street Journal that MIT students basically took all of the Boston public school buses and did an optimization for all of the school buses and saved something like an insane amount of mileage driven and obviously emissions and all of that. So I think that should be something that the engineers at the University of Vermont Engineering should work with their MIT brethren to get that fixed.
That is interesting. And you look at things like UPS has rules where you can only make right turns and it
Correct.
saves tremendous amount of money. Like, stuff like that is
Yeah,
certainly.
they were able to reduce their diesel by leaps and bounds, but yeah, it's about optimizing the school bus routes. And I have to believe that right now, the public school system does not have an optimized school bus route.
We should put a little toll booth in at the school.
That is enough money for everything.
Right. All right, so we had, just before parking, there were a couple of points, and a lot of these, though, we can just discuss in the transportation context. I don't know that we to do that. One thing that I will point out, we don't have page numbers, but the one right before you get to rail, there's a point 6 and 7 that are red. So the bike parking and shower facilities in newer retrofit office buildings is just something that I've noticed over time, that people who have shower facilities where they work tend to ride their bikes to work when they're commuting further. Not sure the general feeling on that, but something to think about. And then, yeah, I mean, continuing to work with the form-based zoning, which I think is just an ongoing effort. And then the actual energy section. All right. So main things, we've had this in our packets a few times. I did some just general updates that I went ahead and accepted. Others I didn't accept them, like just spelling and minor things like that. So the bigger thing is just the points. I'd ask if anybody has anything in general to call out. Otherwise, I can just make some general comments. For example, I thought it was worth adding in some of the detail around the act that was referenced, so that we actually see what those targets are. I think all that all hits the highlights. I mean, with needing to get 90%, having that goal is pretty extreme, and the only way to do that is by reducing consumption and like weatherizing homes. Like these goals are really good, and so from a plan perspective, I just want to make sure that we're backing all that up so that from a substantial deference perspective, we hit all the points, and even if they aren't all of the checkboxes that they've asked for, as long as we can show that we've addressed them in our own way, I think that was the theme that Melanie was getting at. And also on that first page, there are places where we would certainly be looking for data to potentially show how things have been and where we can go if certain things are done, which may get into modeling. Any comments in general on?
My only comment was about the lack of conversation about the smart meters and these kind of like in-house displays that are being used to promote energy conservation these days. So recently, one of my students is just doing an experiment on Burlington Electric Department where we kind of like installed these in-house displays which can track sub-meter level energy usage. And also if you're producing electricity like through solars or geothermal or other technologies, or have the batteries that can like, so you can basically keep track of how much energy is being consumed by what appliance and how much is being generated by what appliance at what time of the day. What we have found in the initial analysis, but we'll know in about a year or so, is that energy information does make a difference in people's habits of conserving once they know what's coming. And some of those technologies can be tracked in the, like on apps, where you can like know, for example, if your some appliance is running which it should not be running, and then you can make sure that it gets turned off. So I think those kind of energy conservation related actions with the smart meters are kind of like integrated with the current smart grid technologies that are being deployed in the state, and it can really influence the conservation behaviors.
Which is a really good point, and I think too that there are some references in working with Green Mountain Power and other utilities to support things like that. I don't know that smart meters were called out specifically, but I completely agree.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, if we can add that somewhere, that would be
Yeah.
kind of great. That was my only comment on this.
I know when I started getting monthly.
I have lots of questions about that, but I'll save that for later. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, there are a lot of issues, right? So,
Yeah. No, I'm just kind of curious what the low-hanging fruit is and
Yeah.
what they,
What do you unplug now?
yeah, you know, like,
yeah, the timing of when you run your washing machines and dryers,
yeah.
they could be switched to off-peak hours. That's the biggest margin that we see in the data.
There's a lot. The utilities are definitely Green Mountain Power is pretty progressive in that
Yeah.
regard. Burlington Electric, I think, is doing some pretty good stuff as well. And it's over the last few years. I know in the last couple of years, I started getting monthly reports showing what my energy usage is compared to my neighbors.
Yeah.
And it changes behavior. Or if you just see this year compared to this month last year.
Yeah.
And, you get the little mini, all right, woo, like less energy this year, even though I was gone half the month.
But now you can, with these kind of devices, you can see it in your room or in your living room.
Exactly.
Or like how much your computer is generating.
Like at a device level, you could get a kilowatt that could tell you exactly what an individual item is using, but with connected devices and that sort of thing, you can really get an idea of where your energy is being used. And I think utilities are moving toward that. as part of the efficiency measures, which is a good thing.
Just as long as your refrigerator doesn't give your financial data to the Russians or something.
Right, that's important too.
Of course, those privacy concerns are very important, yeah.
So the key from a town plan perspective is how do we, what sort of guides do we put in here outside of just working with organizations like Green Mountain Power and other energy efficiency organizations like VEIC or Efficiency Vermont to come up with either incentives, not to use that word explicitly around Dick, but something that can help educate consumers, because I think once people see that sort of thing, when it could be something as simple as caulking windows could then save energy in the winter. Like, it's little things like that that really do add up over time. And
We could model that in the town buildings, in the new
Certainly.
library, for example. I think there was some discussion about maybe using it as a stormwater demonstration place. Maybe it could be an energy, model some of these smart technologies or something.
I think that's part of it
Yeah.
already. Vermont Gas does a free energy audit.
Mhm.
Give you all kinds of tips.
But even this concept of having the town lead by example, I think that really gets the education out there and gets people thinking about it. And it may not happen overnight, but if for example, we had let's say the library, and we could, even if it was getting energy from a solar installation somewhere, however it is, but if you had their energy usage on a website through the town where people could monitor, well, how is energy being used? What are the implications? What did this new upgrade do? That's the sort of thing where you start building case studies, you build awareness, build education, and then people say, oh, I can do this in my home, and this is the savings it could generate. And then we're all working together and saving the world, and it'll be great.
Well, for example, the school renovation, I was personally disappointed that they did not put solar panels up on the roof. But anyway, I asked somebody who was involved in, that whole reconstruction and so forth, what they were doing about that. And, to my dismay, I learned that they were, they're basically outsourcing, probably to town of Rutland, Industrial Solar somewhere is doing our solar for us. But it seems like that would be an example of something that you could make that really alive, particularly to kids. I mean, what better group to indicate these kinds of savings? I know there's been some talk with I think your committee about doing that at the school for stormwater. So sort of in the same kind of way.
Stormwater project.
Yeah, and the two are actually quite interrelated, so.
Another thing that we often ask for when we make development review comments, but it doesn't have any heft because it's not written anywhere, is lower lighting. And I would think there's so much that's been done now in solar outdoor lighting. I know we use it at the Vineyard. It's not the most efficient lighting, but it's downward facing, and it's also it's energy efficient. You just poke it in the ground where you need it, and it gets its energy during the day. And it doesn't have to be especially, especially, I forgot what I was saying. Forget that.
It's good, yeah, it's definitely good for like leading people on walking paths, and things like that.
Right.
Rather than having to shine a huge light over a huge area, you just have little things stuck in the ground that.
That's another thing that could be modeled in public buildings.
In regards to solar roofing, again, Dick, sorry for the word incentive, but do any of you know if Tesla's offering up any sort of incentives for their roof, like their shingles that they're making?
Tesla is not offering any incentives, and they're not. It's a whole nother year probably before you can get them here, because I've talked to them about it a little bit, and yeah, it's expensive.
And that's where technology is going to do what technology does. It's going to continue to improve, and incentives will change. And one of the challenges in the bigger industry, and it's interesting looking across countries and how different countries have done things differently. Subsidies tend to drive behavior, and just to throw out the concept, it's really unfortunate. Like with solar, for example, a lot of times solar can be like the energy that's generated isn't used because there isn't a cost incentive for one party or another to gain. So that energy gets curtailed and it goes to waste. And I think over time, we'll see as battery technology gets more efficient and prices come down, then we'll be able to take that. It won't necessarily to be curtailed. It'll be maybe not as much of a cost as it is today to put it into a battery, store it, and use it later, or feed it back into the grid later when
Right.
rates are, or when
Yeah, peak demand hits.
during peak
Yeah.
when you can get more for
Yeah.
it, and the other way around. So as far as the town plan though goes, my main interest is to get themes into it, because it's hard to talk specific about technologies because of the changes going to happen, particularly between now and the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So one big one, and it's encouraging to hear others say this as well, is to, again, having the town lead by example, but that will come back to needing to understand the data to have models to be able to make a financial case, to make a proposal so that it could be something doable. Whereas I think if there aren't solid incentives, then that's a place where the cost of an initial implementation might just shut it down before we even get any traction. So it'd be really good to have numbers to back it up and forecasts and that sort of thing. All right. So on the, similar to what we were talking about, the point 3 on the second energy page at the bottom, like enhancing residents and business web pages of the town website, something that was mentioned earlier, to have real-time data or monthly reporting data to show where energy is used so that we can start getting that word out and start getting the mindset to hopefully make progress in these directions. There are points in here like number 4 on the next page, increasing and encouraging alternatives to single-person automobiles for personal travel, including bicycling, walking, ride-sharing, public transit. And I think these are the types of points that Kate addresses some of the concerns that you were having in our last conversation. Ride-sharing is another thing. I mean, we know where it is right now. And I'm not for or against any particular industry, but it's interesting to me that, say, from the airport to Shelburne ran me $35, $40 this morning, whereas an Uber would have been 20. Mm-hmm. So there's economic arguments on various sides, and it's not that I'm against the taxi industry by any means, but when you have ride sharing, in the rural areas, it's not as common, but when you get into cities, there's a lot less incentive to have a car that you're using 10% of the time. So encouraging things like that will have a similar effect to reducing the amount of energy that's consumed as the overall theme.
There's a teaser recently that is suggesting that there is some news on some open source ride sharing initiative that's going to be happening in Vermont before long. So keep your eyes open.
Yeah. Well, and eventually with self-driving cars and that sort of thing, I mean, there's already the proofs of concept going on in various places where you just have a fleet of those cruising around.
Yeah, I mean, I can put my Tesla back into the, while I'm busy not using it, it's driving around picking other people up, right? So, yeah.
It's amazing.
No, my car is driving. Yeah, I'm not doing it. Yeah.
When I had a bunch of teenagers at home, I often fantasized about the idea of maybe in our neighborhood where there were a similar number of teenagers, rather than have to go buy another car, if there could just be like a kind of neighborhood car that the teenagers could use. So, yeah, I think this is all going to be changing.
With throttle controls, can't go above 47.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think over the next few years, there are going to be some pretty significant changes. And from a town perspective, I think being in a position to already have your mind thinking that way so that we can be in a better position to adopt these new things as they make themselves available would be a healthy thing. So again, not really going bullet by bullet, but from any previous reviews or for this packet, if there are any specific comments, because, go ahead.
Why do they call Vermont gas renewable natural gas? It's just natural gas.
That's a good point. Yeah. Oh, wait, is that the
It's
one?
B. And
Yeah, wait a minute. On up here.
it's after objectives and recommended actions.
Renewable natural gas may
4B.
refer to gas generated from methane. Yeah. Like landfill gas and that sort
RNG.
of thing.
Renewable
It-
natural
it
gas.
is-
I think that's a specific program
That they're
That's
doing.
why it's labeled as such.
Yeah,
Hmm. I'd like to
Um,
know what that is.
but that's a good point.
Maybe,
Add some context.
like cow power,
Hmm.
that's their equivalent of it.
All right. And because it was mentioned earlier, the one section, it was the goal to promote decreased use of fossil fuels for heating. I also was balking, it's on,
Right above where they encourage you to use a wood stove.
Right.
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that I wasn't really psyched about. I'm not sure that, and again, this gets into data because as far as district wood heating and that sort of thing, it may be more efficient than oil, and it certainly would be using something that's not a fossil fuel and is technically renewable. But it doesn't seem to be the most efficient thing that could be used. So I wasn't sure if we wanted to have an emphasis on wood in that way. But at the same time, again, relying on data, if we had some metrics to go on, then there might be a legitimate case for doing something like wood district heating. It's just my gut reaction was, sure, it'd be better than oil, but I think we could probably do better than that. I'm just not sure what exactly. So I didn't know if we wanted to specifically call that out as a thing, as an objective that we'd want to be going after, using wood specifically.
I kind of like the independence of wood heat.
Oh, I love it.
I don't like being tied to a grid that with all 100% of my electricity, particularly in this day when we know that, well, we don't know how long a grid could go down. So I think if you can do wood pellets and
Yeah, and again, to make the point that it's certainly, I like the point of the energy independence and tying it back to technology and where things are going. From a town plan perspective, the direction that this could go in, and I'll just throw it out. You could have, as an individual home, you could have solar panels, and when battery prices come down enough, you could have battery storage, and if the utility would let you, or if it was, if there was an option, you could make yourself a microgrid or your own island. And then that would be the same benefit that you're talking about with wood, but not using wood. Now, from a home heating perspective, having a pellet stove or a wood stove and stuff is awesome. I love it too. But I'm thinking more in terms of district wood heating. And I don't know enough about that. Maybe we need to get, or I need to get educated on it. But I wonder if there are more effective ways of doing that while avoiding using heating oil for things like schools and municipal buildings, as these points are leading us towards. I don't know if anybody knows more or has anything to add, but
I just had one about the wind. I know that we heard the presentation from the CCRB representative, and they said that they're waiting for guidance about the wind technologies, but there are a lot of micro wind technologies that do not necessarily violate the height standards for the large-scale wind turbines, right? Those are like micro-scale wind technologies, for example, look like trees. They're like at the tree height technologies, and they have like leaves that float, that can be rotated, and they can generate quite a bit of electricity to kind of like supplement if you got solar panels and wind, because they kind of like are functional at different times of the 24-hour cycle. So complementary, and they are catching up a lot in many countries where like they've been demonstrated to be pretty successful. So I go to the UNFCCC Conference of Parties meetings, and they display them at variety of scales. For example, the forthcoming meeting in Bonn, I'm going to a side event there where they're kind of like pitching under the Climate Action Network, kind of like larger purview, those technologies that can really, I think, transform because they can harness the wind even at like 5 miles per hour average, as opposed to the large scale wind, you need to have like 15 miles per hour kind of like wind speed or so. So I think like having something about micro wind technologies could be useful, right?
I think it would be fantastic because, we've got the Route 7 corridor where we have a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And, we are hoping to redevelop some of those properties and more intensively redevelop some existing properties with the idea that would allow us to sort of depave other areas in order to enhance our stormwater resiliency. And I think these kinds of products would be perfect in that area if they could be scaled down enough to, be compatible with.
Exactly, that's why, because a lot of the
A commercial
residential
built
neighborhoods
environment, yeah.
have kind of like height requirements, and so you cannot install larger wind turbines, but these kind of technologies were designed to kind of like be kind of operational in those kind of environments. And
Or if we have, let's say, a kind of constructed wetland or something like
Yeah.
that, so it's regulated differently, why not put a whole bunch of those things in it, like a sort of orchard,
Yeah.
and then you could, bang, we could probably.
Right.
Because
And
I think it's more efficient than solar at this
Yeah,
point, isn't it? I
yeah.
mean, you get more.
And I was in a meeting with the Department of Public Service people a few months ago, and this issue of onshore wind technologies came as well, which I know like people have some aesthetic issues with that, but I think Shelburne has a very nice shoreline, and there's a lot of wind on the lake, especially in the winter months. And there are these floating technologies, you can put these those can, micro wind turbines or mesoscale wind turbines can be on the lake, and they can kind of like change their direction depending on the wind direction. And they can be pretty kind of like productive in terms of generating renewable energy technologies. So we don't have to be like necessarily tied to solar,
Yeah.
given our location in terms of the latitude and longitudes.
Well, I think if they were, they didn't impose an aesthetic impact and they were quiet, or relatively quiet, I think that.
Yeah, in terms of the noise, the technology has come a long way. I mean, I think transportation traffic noise is higher. You can measure that in decibels versus some of the newer technologies.
That's really interesting.
That is interesting. I need to look that up. All right, well then after the, yeah, please.
Geothermal's not really ever
I,
noted.
around the district wood heating, my note was that wood isn't as sustainable as solar, wind, or geothermal. And
It's just interesting that we call out a lot of different specific forms, and geothermal's never, I mean, just thinking in terms of, to your point, latitude and longitude, yeah, we may not have the best sun angles, but
when I moved here, geothermal was definitely not cost effective, but over
Right.
the last few years, it definitely has been more. I was chatting with a company this week about some things that they're doing, and it's becoming very economical, especially especially for commercial, but even usually it's more for new residential, because obviously you're
disrupting the soil
Yeah,
anyway. Yeah.
right.
Do they still drill 2 wells, or are they using 1 well?
This particular company, we didn't get into the actual, what they were doing. They were sort of like an industrial heat pump where they used, they could generate ice and then flip their technology around to use ice to then cool. Like there's just some really cool stuff that's coming, which is why I think it'd be good to allude to technologies to keep our eye on from a town perspective, but like with the district wood heating specifically, I think the thing that caught my
It's just
eye
strange
is
to
I don't
call-
want to lead
strange to
with that.
call out that one.
Right.
Yeah. It's worth having on the list, but maybe that's bullet 6.
Like as,
Yeah.
here are some things to consider, and
Yeah.
then maybe we work that into having, I don't know, having a, well, models are good, but this is something else that the hypothetical subcommittee could maybe. All right, so then the last page in the energy section, and then we can have almost 20 minutes for rural or more. Outside of what's on here, I don't think I had anything that we haven't really discussed, aside from wanting to encourage things like community solar. And not to just go exclusively there, but wind as well, as that technology gets more.
I think we could probably add our criteria for what acceptable, like if the wind technology meets these criteria, you know, it's like not aesthetically, it's not horrible, and it doesn't make a ton of noise, you know, we could be more refined about what that is, then, you know, go for it, but just but just have the caveat of what we want it to be. I don't think that's unreasonable.
Yeah, I don't either. And this, I do want to mention as well, before we get off of this topic, that I think I had read recently, and I don't know if it was the final word, but that there was a proposed solar deployment somewhere within view of the top of Mount Philo that got rejected because people could see it. How as a town can we stop that? On an extreme level.
They didn't, though, the state did.
Was that the state?
Those are not reviewed by the town. I just don't know what role the town of Charlotte played, or whether or not those who opposed it cited language in, say, the Charlotte Town Plan. That's what led the Public Service Board to deny the permit. We'll get a copy of that decision so people know what the basis for. I'd read only the broad outlines of it.
I thought it was because it was a state park and it was interrupting the natural vista from the top of the state park.
Yeah, like 180,000 people visit or something, I don't know. What it
Yeah,
was.
Yeah, a
it's
lot
the
of people
most
there.
visited state park in
Is it
Vermont.
1,800 or 180,000?
Yeah, I
It's quite a
don't
few people
recall,
up
but
there.
it just makes me think. A few years ago, I was on a train going across the German countryside, and you see solar all over the place, and it made me happy. I do understand the NIMBY aspect from like if there's something that's going to generate a lot of noise or traffic, or it's going to be a massive eyesore kind of thing, but I think we need to adjust what we consider eyesores to be, because being able to breathe and see is, I would argue, more important than seeing some blue in the landscape. And incidentally, there is a technology coming out now with in solar, yeah, they can change the color of the panels. But
Interesting.
maybe someday they can make it so that it'll be transparent, and you can just see whatever is underneath it, and it'll be
No, that's coming too.
fantastic.
There's a technology now that your windows can be solar collectors as well, and they'll stay completely clear. Doesn't have to be black.
Yeah, which is, and these are all the things where from a town plan perspective, I want to make sure that we're open to these things so that
Right.
we don't lock ourselves into language that we can't back out of later.
Like, you could make an argument
Which
that,
is why I think having some maybe aesthetic criteria is kind of important, so that we are in a position to show that we embrace these things as they become available. And it sounds like you guys know an awful lot more about this than I do, but these things are just coming online. I mean, it's the rate of acceleration of how quickly these new technologies and sort of ancillary technologies are coming along is tremendous. So, I think just saying, you know, having, standing firm on kind of core principles of how we think which kind of goes into the future growth area a little bit, you know, what the sort of aesthetic expectations are that we should meet. And then otherwise, fine, go for it, you know.
And then just pulled up the BT Digger article on that project, and it was opposed by both the town of Charlotte and the Agency of Natural Resources and denied on aesthetics. So it would have been undue adverse impact on aesthetics. That, sorry?
You know, I mean, Kate makes a good point, but aesthetics is really subjective. I think wind turbines are beautiful, and I'm really happy to have them. But lots of people don't think that, so that's just a slippery slope. I mean, you may want to have it in there, but what's it going to really do except create controversy?
And I really think that that's where having case studies and models and numbers to back things up. I mean, it's one thing, so the big offshore wind off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, or yeah, like all those areas.
Well, the Cape one got rejected, and the Rhode Island Block Island's coming online, yeah.
But the Cape one had been out there for years and years and years, and
Well, the
it,
Kennedys could see it, so it got
Right.
dropped down, yeah.
but then, and it's one of those at what cost? And I think then it becomes an education campaign, and something that really stuck out to me when we did our site visit over to Shelburne Farms with the select board. There were questions, and I understand where they were coming from because it's in our regulations, but there were questions like, okay, hey, this is great, and can that house over there, there are houses over there, can they see this? And it's just, I understand why the questions were being asked because that's what our bylaws say. And this is actually on point 6 where it says, so long as concerns related to natural and scenic resources are adequately addressed. And I don't disagree with that. I wouldn't want to take away from the picturesque nature of Shelburne, but I do think that on some level we need to really take a serious look at, we can't just say, yes, we want to be able to meet these needs, but we don't want to be able to see it. And if we're going to wait for the technology to come around that's going to make it so that we can't see it, we're going to be waiting a while. So,
Yeah, agreed.
And I think that's a big thing for this town to tackle because there are a lot of conflicting views from the residents.
I guess what I was going to say is that in terms of objectives and recommended actions, and we call out like specifically heat pumps and district wood heating and wood pellet transition, do we even want to call out specific forms, or do we want to just kind of keep it with a general desire for renewable, efficient, you know, and note that, you know, specific technologies, we could, you know, for example, these exist today, but we know that the pace of you know, is accelerating in terms of technological development. So, you know, we don't want to be limited to the, you know, so in other words, kind of state our goals in general. Note, by the way, these are some of the existing things, but not that these are the ones we should chase.
And that gets to your point, Kate, around the aesthetics criteria and that sort of thing, where maybe we don't keep focusing on certain technologies, but say, here's the metrics, here's the desired outcome, work within this framework.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that was the last page of energy for now. I suspect this is going to be a conversation that goes on for a while.
So future land use, I'll just be really quick. So what I basically am hoping to do tonight is to kind of sell you guys on the idea of taking, using a physical planning or design approach to thinking about how we approach future land use planning in the rural areas. So, and some of the information that Dean attached in your packets kind of sort of speaks a little bit to what that means. And then I just did, I threw together a couple of slides that, just from books and stuff, that I use as resources a lot, that just had some maybe, hopefully to give you a little bit of a clearer idea of what is meant by physical design and planning. So it's basically, it's based on, what it looks like. And that is based on, I think this is very grounded in a couple of things that I wanted to draw your attention to. One is this guy called Chris Dirksen, who is, what is he? He's like some EPA.
It was funded by an EPA program, but he's with Clarion Associates, or has been for 30 years.
So he's a planner from, I think, Colorado.
A planner and attorney.
And
who's written
he did
lot.
a sort, we got a little grant, this is back in 2011, and he kind of came in and did a couple of public meetings and with the select board and so on, and boards. It was just to sort of give us a kind of snapshot on like how our planning and zoning held up, in terms of sustainability.
He did a
and
code audit.
a
they called
code
it.
audit, okay. And so, anyway, I asked Dean to, of course, this was like at 4 o'clock this afternoon, but I asked Dean to circulate it to you all, and I thought it might be helpful for you guys to just sort of take a look at it. Some of the, it's still very kind of germane to what we're talking about. It's clear evidence that I think, going back at least to 2011, that, doing more to protect the rural areas has been a concern of many and a priority of many people in this town for quite some time. So that seemed to me to be important to bring out. And unfortunately, we've taken very few steps that he recommended back in 2011 for a variety of reasons. But on the positive side, I think that you guys will see that we are, in talking about the rural area and future land use in the way that we have started to talk about it, we are actually engaged in a discussion about maybe taking action on some of the things that he recommended back in 2011. So that's progress that's meaningful, I think.
Do we have this document?
I did send it.
Yeah, I
ask Dean
didn't
to send
forward it
you.
to everybody because, like
Yeah.
I said, it was about 4 o'clock.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's,
5
this
o'clock.
is,
Yeah.
the last minute as usual.
Actually, it's been on the website. This is a document that's been on the town's website in the past. This was done in 2011, so it's been around. I don't know that it's still on the website.
So,
Did he comment that he liked our town plan?
Sorry?
It seemed to me that his comment was he liked our town plan after. In general, I mean, I think he was the one.
Yeah, I mean,
he
It's
thought we
been a
were
while
doing
since I've
a
looked.
really wonderful job with conservation,
Yeah,
and we
yeah.
were doing some things really, really well. That being said, he identified as a major source of concern and vulnerability for us, the fact that we have 5-acre zoning in our rural areas. So, which is something that I've kind of come back to. Now, he had a proposal which was to move to 20-acre zoning with compensation to landowners through transfer of development rights, which, great idea. I have a hard time believing that that's going to have a lot of traction in this town, at least right now. But it speaks to a pretty drastic and determined approach to have a future vision that limits the amount of growth that can happen in the rural areas. So I think that is, there are different ways to approach that and get there. So I think that looking at taking a physical planning or design approach has a lot of merit. And one of the reasons is because of the wonderful, recently publicly approved open space plan. It really, you guys are kind of taking that approach with that document. And I would like to suggest that we use that as a sort of scaffold for how we approach thinking about what could happen in the future in the rural area. And that might take a three-pronged approach, which, and I'm just shooting ideas out here, just spitballing, but that might, we may conclude, so,
The conservation map, or?
yeah, just sort of the big picture overall, how are we doing kind of map.
How are we doing kind of map?
Yeah, like,
I wasn't sure which one that was. I'm sorry.
Well-
I will find it.
let's see,
conserved lands?
yes.
earlier.
Yeah, I think that was earlier, yeah. Yeah, there we go, okay.
I mean, do you
So,
want to point at things? Because there's a pointer here if you want to.
oh, no, I can just talk kind of, so, I mean, I think the first question would be, you know, is this sufficient? I mean, what could we be doing more about in terms of conserving land? And so this might lead to kind of a three-pronged approach where maybe there are certain, maybe we need to be a little clearer about what we think should be conserved and areas that we believe could remain rural and be a bit more specific about what we mean about that. And then areas where we might want to encourage some modest development. And that might be thinking about, you know, kind of like a Hamlet approach. I don't know if it's be appropriate, Dean, at this point, to show some of those other images.
Some of these?
Let's see. Yeah. So right here, this is kind of an interesting one. This is Sturbridge, Massachusetts, and it shows how development happened over time from the 18th century until about was it the latter part or the middle part of the 19th century? Middle part of the 19th century.
Yeah, 1775, 1825, 1795, 1835.
Yeah, so it's kind of taking a bit more of a finer grained approach as opposed to this is the rural area. And then, you know, it's kind of undifferentiated from that. But being more place-based. And let's see, what other, yeah, I'm just, so, and, you know.
Tell me which ones you want.
Here we go. We could also take, as I said, there's a bunch of different ways to get here, but the idea is to start with the principle of our rural lands are a finite resource, right? We're not making any more of them. And some of them are exceedingly precious indeed for reasons of resources. And that can be natural resources, scenic resources, and very often a combination of the two. You know, they're usually quite interrelated. So, you know, at the very least, having some pretty clear expectations about how growth is to fit in when it does occur in the rural area. Much more specific about what we mean by that than we have now. And so here are some sort of illustrations that sort of start to get at, you know, what could be achieved with stronger PUD regulations. And we could, right now, what is it, what's our threshold? Is it 4, 5, where the PUD, 5? So we could even consider like lowering that to something like maybe, you know, 3.
Over 5 is a mandatory PUD in the rural district, so.
Yeah.
There's a little bonus of sorts if you do it under 5. But you're right, we have to rewrite the PUD.
Kind of, you know, add some.
You brought that up a couple meetings ago, saying drop it down to 1, right?
I think PUDs should be the norm.
So anyway, there seems like there's a couple different ways to take this, but if we use a sort of physical planning kind of lens to tackle this, we can start to get a sense for maybe there's some sort of low-hanging fruit where we can kind of tune things up a little bit, or that we could, the next step might be to be a bit more aggressive and think about maybe subdividing the existing sort of monolith of the rural area and actually coming up with maybe a conservation area that's a bit more focused on protecting those scenic and natural resource assets much more deliberately. And we may need to get a bit more information about, that information may need to be updated in order to really be able to do that. But this section of the plan would be where you would provide that prioritization and sort of, direction. And then maybe there are some places that, particularly places that might abut the growth area boundary, or are near a crossroads. Well, might we think about those places a little differently? Would it be the worst thing in the world if we had a little bit more intensive development in those areas, provided it was done with a great deal of thought and care? So talking about maybe some kind of form-based standards that might inform how that happens. And then, maybe some areas we just think it's best that they just stay working lands. So just to try and get a little bit more of a clearer approach to what we want. Because I think, the housing map kind of really, it's pretty potent for me at least. If you were to look at that, you can see how much sprawl has occurred in the rural area, right? And how in the areas that are conserved and or privately owned, Shelburne Farms, for example, there's been really, very little of activity in that way. So, and Shelburne Farms actually is an amazing example of how to think about this. That's a singly owned asset, and they've, in order to, pay the bills and survive, they've entered into arrangements with people who can build houses there, and the houses are all very carefully sited, and as are the public paths, so that nobody kind of confronts each other, right, visually. So, but that offers just a kind of example, I think, that many of us are familiar with, for how to kind of think about we might propose going forward in the rural area, using this wonderful open space plan as a sort of starting point for kind of organizing what we might try to achieve. So that was really kind of what I wanted to try and bring out tonight. And
An interesting data point that kind of created at me for some reason was the fact that the rural district has a bigger percentage of housing units than the village core does.
right.
17, bigger percentage, 17% to 15%. Granted, the rural area is 75% of the land mass, but that still struck me as.
Well, but if we start looking at the housing values, and that we are a commuter community to Burlington, and that the median income of Shelburne residents is much higher than the rest, that to me is where it's not surprising. It's people are moving to Shelburne in part into the rural areas to not be looking at their neighbors, to have those natural views. And I think that when I've had conversations with Gail and the committee on the natural resource side, to kind of dovetail into the conservation side, is figure out which pieces of land are the most important to conserve. We bake that into the plan, and then tie that into people who want to donate to buy the land to keep it conserved. And that keeps parts of the rural character rural, because having that privacy and beautiful space is what's going to attract people to buying very expensive parcels of land, like the ones that are for sale on Shelburne Point, and put $4 or $5 million homes on a 10-acre plot of land or 5-acre plot of land, and then they pay their 70 grand in property taxes a year. So I think that's where this push and pull becomes really difficult, because people are moving further away from Burlington to escape kind of the intense development.
It also creates a bit of a challenge in terms of transportation and energy. So you've got the push and pull on a lot of fronts that way. And we have to think about how much we want to encourage people to get out onto very big plots of land instead of making neighborhoods.
So there is some, really great work that's been done in the area of conservation design. There's a guy called Randall Arendt who's done some really wonderful work, starting in Massachusetts. And so there's quite a lot known about it, and it's a pretty, I think it might be an effective technique for us to pursue. So that might be in the category of kind of like tweaking what we already have. And then if we wanted to take it a step further, that might be something like kind of creating some sort of an overlay map that might indicate certain areas that are especially, have been identified as being especially precious for one reason or another. And another area, another section that might indicate places where we would really like to have farming happen indefinitely into the future, or other kinds of rural uses, traditional rural uses. And then places where if development is going to occur, it might make sense to try and incentivize it happening.
I wonder if we couldn't get a map that would show us where we are right now with potential development, if it were to just be developed as is. How many lots are there out there? And then,
We have some
and where
numbers
are they?
that, Yeah, the Regional Planning Commission did some of that number crunching for us a couple of years ago. I don't have it right here, but you can,
And we have a build-out tool too, that we can use to, which I think would get to kind of show maybe with 5-acre zoning what the potential is for parcelization, and, and then maybe that, I think we have to kind of know what we're looking at potentially before we can start to make informed decisions about
Right,
where
and we can rule out certain areas that are,
where
they're
we
just,
go.
most of that dark area on the right side is Shelburne Pond. That's something we, there's not much development going to occur there.
yeah, I mean, I think some of what I would,
So if we could get a basic idea of how many units we're talking about, just to start with, and then try to calculate where exactly growth might.
so for
Might
the next,
happen.
if the group says for the next time that there's a discussion of the rural district, you want to see this kind of proto build-out map, we'll present it.
Be interesting too to have as supplement to that some aesthetics where you could take an image of what exists now and then slap however many houses could be there, so people understand.
How would a PUD work on this parcel?
Well, I mean,
And
just when
that's
you
the kind
could
of
look
thing
at
that
it,
we could do.
you could look at it
once
from
we see
30,000 feet and kind of be like, oh, that looks bad, but really take some views that people know around town and say, okay, and then put some McMansions in it. And-
Yeah, that would be a little bit more work.
Yeah, no, I'm just,
But,
I'm just thinking in terms of how do you, to get people to understand, like, this
And-
is the worst case scenario, like, this view could look like
Yeah.
this.
I'll
you
come
know?
back to that very point when we talk about possible grant applications,
Yeah,
because that was essentially the subject of a grant application that we filed that didn't get funded a year or two ago. It was to work with the RPC to do a build-out analysis and, in addition, to do some 3D models that would give a better idea of what would it look like on the land. Right now, what I've got as part of this growth tool work that the RPC did for us is just the potential development in units, but it doesn't give you a sense really of what it would look like beyond that. Okay, this many, if there's a 10-acre parcel, maybe we're talking 2 houses.
right.
And just to plant a thought, based on our current regulations, unless I'm wrong, it would be easier to build a McMansion on a plot of land than it would be to put solar panels on it.
Mhm.
In a nutshell, just something to think about.
I mean, the thing about, just touching on briefly some of Kate's comments, the town, as it's been planned, has this center zone, which is the sewer service area. It's got these areas that are in light green that may or may not appear to you the way the room is lit. And then we have this white. The thing about the white is that it's really not all the same. There are places within that white that are essentially like the green, or very, very close to it because of different types of restrictions. And then there are places in the white that, and in a sense I want to say, they want to be more like the blue. Or at least people come to us and they'll ask, why can't it be more like the blue? So, and I think that's kind of what, some of what Kate is getting at is that as we look at this rural area and you look at that housing map and you see all the dots in it, and if we assume that it's on a trend and that trend is going to continue, well, it's not going to be what people want it to be if we don't do some kind of intervention. And I think some of the ideas that are floating around include, picking up on what Perry was saying, is that, okay, maybe a lot of thought has been given to the natural resource value, but the real key is the aesthetic value. Well, maybe we've got to figure out what those three properties are, and those will be the targets of conservation, and they'll be turned green. I should add that there is an area that is the Bar Farm that is down in this location that has been conserved, and so it should turn green as well. But we'll have that map next time.
I have always had this sort of bizarre feeling as I drive along Spear Street, particularly in South Burlington, and I look at all the McMansions there that weren't there when I moved here. And I often wonder, with economic changes, how many of those are going to become multifamily homes at some point, and whether we ever need to think ahead enough to have provisions where those developed areas that are close to the central area should not be able to be subdividable for more clustered housing. And it may not be something that we want to do right now, but if we think about growing, and we don't want to grow in the rural area, those areas are already disturbed. And it's just a thought I have every time I drive along Spear Street. Food for thought. No, I don't want it, but I often wonder when I see economic ups and downs, and I see for sale signs on a lot of these large houses, and there are already communities that bounce off of Spear Street, and I think to myself, we have, those are not rural lands anymore, they're just large lawns.
Well, there's a project on Spear Street that is very similar to what you're describing. I think it's on the west side if you're headed south, and it was a single-family house that had this central driveway that's set way, way back in the hills, kind of and then they're putting this sort of cluster of houses in the front.
Townhouses in the front.
Yeah, and so it's, it's a type of infill development, I guess.
It is infill, and I mean, I think we think of infill most of the time in the city, in the
Yeah.
town. But if we want to preserve the rural area, it might be just worth some speculation as to what would that look like as opposed, if that became our growth area.
Right.
That lot was zoned exactly for what it is. Just as we've zoned, like we did Webster Road several years ago, and all of a sudden it blossomed the last 3 years.
And I don't love seeing Webster Road blossom, but some of those are nice communities, and they do create a more contiguous town.
Right.
When we
So-
did the zoning, it was,
So there are ways to sort of start to attack this, which would be, again, sort of tweaking what we already have, starting that way, and kind of coming to understand its implications better, and doing things like, again, tweaking might involve adopting conservation PUD standards and lowering the threshold for what is a PUD. But also things like expanding what can be done in terms of accessory dwelling units, and maybe even encouraging them in some way more so in certain areas than others. So those would be sort of like maybe baby steps, and then if we decide, no, we think it's appropriate to be a bit more, bolder steps, we could figure out what those might be. But anyway, I was just trying to sort of start off with, here's some things that I've noticed, and I'm glad that they seem to resonate with you as well, Gail, and here's some things that we can do to understand them better and then maybe take steps to address them.
There was one other resource that I remember several years back, it might be 5 or 6 years at this point. There was a woman named Julie, and I forgot her last name, who had a lot of, she did a big presentation. Julie Campoli, yeah. And she also had a lot of images as to how we can more efficiently design communities. And she's local here in Vermont, or was. I don't know if she still is.
I think, Sean, did you have a?
Oh, yeah. Great, thank you. I just wanted to express my support for the hamlet idea that Kate has mentioned at your August meeting when we discussed some of these issues. You mentioned how, at least from an ecological perspective, the goal would be to pull or to ensure that new development is really concentrated near the existing infrastructure, near the roads. And ultimately, I think that hamlet idea could be very effective. The question is, of course, how do you actually affect it? And it seems to me that with that type of idea, you would really have to have a hard boundary, that this is the edge of the hamlet, and beyond that is something else. And I don't know whether you have really low zoning, or what's the right term, high density zoning in the hamlet, and very, very low density, such as what Chris Dirksen suggested, 20-acre zoning beyond that. But there would have to be either a hard boundary or a very specific planning structure to ensure that the hamlet just doesn't encroach beyond the initial conception. But I do really like that idea, and it would be interesting to consider by what mechanism we could actually affect that, so that those key ecological areas, the key aesthetic areas are conserved, especially by maintaining that higher density development along the existing roads and the existing infrastructure.
Solid discussions on both energy and land use. I like where things are heading. Is that good to wrap up those topics in the interest of time and do the municipal grant or municipal planning grant options?
Yeah, can I just finish up by saying,
Oh, sure.
I think this physical design approach these are some pretty ambitious goals that we have. And I think this, by looking at conditions on the ground, it's a way for us to look very objectively at all this information, because otherwise it's very difficult to do it otherwise. So does that make sense to everybody else? Does that sound like a compelling, meaningful approach to take? Is there some consensus on that? Okay, great. So I can, if with that sort of endorsement or initial endorsement, I can pursue a little bit more information about, maybe effective things that have been done in other communities, and sort of a bit more on some of these methods for next time.
Structure too, I'll create a couple of things and get them to you.
Okay, great, yeah. Good. All right, I'm done.
Thank you. So, what's happening in the world of municipal planning grant options?
I included in your packet some information about the grant program, and the schedule that we are looking at is that there is another round of grant applications that would be received in the middle of October. That I don't know that I will spend too much time talking about the program. The thing that I wanted to give you about an idea about was the topic of some of the recent grant applications, and this is where I'm coming back to the point that I made when we were talking about the rural area. Back in 2015, that's when we submitted, a grant application that was the build-out analysis and these 3D visualizations, and it wasn't funded. Last year, we submitted a grant application to update what's called the 2000 transportation study. It did not also get funded by the municipal planning grant, but it did get funded by a different program. When the commission was considering what it might apply for as a project, we looked at the possibility of resubmitting the build-out. We looked at plan amendments having to do with the Section 238 process. We looked at opinion survey. We looked at flood resilience. Anyway, you can see this list here, but the decision was made to apply for this, and it wasn't funded. So I just wanted people to see what some of the ideas that had been considered last year were. In 2014, going back in time a little bit more, if I can get this to slide down. In 2014, we didn't file an application because we were working on form-based zoning. Same thing for 2013. In 2013, actually, we were completing work on something called the Village Economic and Planning Study. I don't have a copy of that to wave around, but it was a study that qualified under one of the 3 priorities that is still in effect. If I flipped back to the planning grant materials where I've called out the 3 areas, plan amendments, or rather, grants that applied for funding to update a town plan are one of the 3 priorities. Regulation amendments that are implementing or making the regs and the plan more consistent with each other is another priority. And the third priority is studies that are looking at specific topics, particularly when they have to do with infrastructure and village areas and walkability. And so this 2012 project was selected under that. Now, earlier tonight, Dick or somebody made reference to, or Asim had made reference to the possibility of a study looking at, I can't remember what specific topic, but that might be a contender or a possibility at least. So the question before the commission is an important one, and unfortunately we don't have as much time to talk about it as would be considered ideal, and that is what, if we submit a grant application in 2017, should be the focus. Now, I wanted to mention that I had been kicking around this discussion with Jamie, and I'm just going to share his priorities are shown in this email here. Town plan, and then he's folding in this idea of support for the rural district revisioning, development implementation of scenic viewshed map, updating the wildlife habitat and associated areas maps with information. So anyway, you can read these, and bylaw subdivision regs, conservation subdivision design. Now, in terms of timing, the applications are due in October. The decisions are made typically late December. The funding doesn't get flowing until January or February, and they're usually 18-month projects. To the extent we're talking about anything having to do with the town plan, we have to remember town plan, February 2019, and you got to work back a few months at least because of the amendment process. So maybe not the best idea unless it was something really concise, focused in the form of maybe an opinion survey or something really discrete, not likely to carry over. I'll stop talking. Do people have thoughts on what we should be submitting a grant application for, assuming We do maximum awards, $20,000. We would match that, 20%, we have budgeted for the match.
That's about $8,000, it looked like.
Yeah, there are these smaller grants, if we limited it to $8,000 or less, then there's not a match requirement. There are also grant applications that can be filed by 2 adjoining communities, and we haven't done one of those, I think, ever. And we haven't been working with
I
them.
just want to say, I don't think that Jamie's goals for the rural area are necessarily, we couldn't continue with the town plan update of the rural area. I mean, those would almost be, like, we could have those be almost like goals, and then we pursue a grant to actually work on those, right? Because the town plan is just goals and recommended actions, and maybe one of the recommended actions is pursue a grant to do da-da-da-da, what he's talking about. So you see what I'm saying?
Well, the thing that I'm hoping we can get clarity on tonight is what would be the subject of a grant application that the next step would be to get to the select board and say, do you agree with the planning commission's idea to file an application for this grant project? So we're talking about what concrete idea would we want to pursue an application for? So it's less of the.
The other list that
Yep.
you had.
From last year, you mean, this one?
Yeah, I mean, it looked like you guys had a build-out analysis not successful in 2015, and then you didn't pursue it last year in 2016.
Correct, we applied for this study instead.
Right.
And that's
Why
about to
was-
get underway.
And why was it not successful in 2015? Do you get feedback as to why you weren't selected or picked,
I
or?
think we had
You know-
gotten a bunch of grants, didn't we?
I think that some of the answers they tell you, they say, it was a competitive year,
Right.
you know.
We did get a
And
couple.
did we really punch, the priorities do change from year to year, and I always think that it is important to make sure your grant applications are don't bother going after something that you can't make a straight face argument is one of the priorities for that year. So I would not want us to do something that we couldn't straight face argue was a plan update or a zoning amendment or a special study. I think that build-out analysis could, however, the emphasis of the studies is on areas focused for growth and walkability, and we're really talking about the rural area. At least we've got to sell beyond the obvious initial reaction is that, well, this is the area they don't want to grow, and that's not where.
Unless you took it with the approach of Kate's Hamlet idea, so in other
Yeah.
words, how we want our rural area
Yeah.
to,
It's just-
to be more connected and walkable,
Yeah.
but we need to do a study
Yeah.
on what it would look like if we didn't.
Yeah, it's just that one step removed from the priority.
Yeah.
And,
I have a conflict. And it's not wetlands mapping. It is, but.
you have a conflict or you're conflicted?
I'm conflicted. I like Jamie's idea of the stormwater, and that's my conflict, because
Yeah, second that. Well, I guess especially when you look at, in terms of priorities, and you look at what that challenge is for the greater area, it seems like it would be an easier sell.
Well, I have an idea. What about instead of focusing on the rural district, we focus on the growth areas and how we can grow those more sustainably? Because I am very concerned that, we just discovered that we have some like phenomenally precious riparian resources, and then we also have really kind of, what's the word, like silty soils that, we have, the soils are even more sort of fragile than we knew, and then we have, and that's right where we're talking about putting all this growth. So how do we pull that off? To me, that would be, and it seems to me that the obvious solution is you put the development where it makes sense to be, and you make it as dense as possible, which automatically means that it's going to be walkable, and it should be connected, and all these other things. So, however, that being said, a few years ago, there was a proposal to do some of that on the O'Brien parcel, and that was met with, not not well received, I think would be a polite way to put it. So, so how do we, I don't know, how do we pull this off? And how do we engage residents in, if we are going to develop sustainably and more equitably and with more resilience on every level, that's going to look a little different than business as usual. And how do we, sell people on that,
I had a discussion at the end of the summer with a friend of mine who was the head of the Virgin's Planning Commission a couple years ago. He lives in Shelburne now and is an energy guy, so he's part of this theoretical subcommittee potentially. I would want to pull him in. But, he said that the most effective stuff they did there as a planning commission was when they had the time and energy to go out and really get that feedback, and really working directly with the community as much as possible, going to the Little League games, going to the farmers markets, so that as they rewrote their plan, you could say, as so-and-so said, as so-and-so stated, as, 80% of respondents we talked to said, we want to preserve the rural character, So I think if there was a study to be done, I would love to see something like that where we just had a little bit of the grant and, money and resources to be able to just, for everything we're doing towards the plan, to know that we've got really clear feedback. Because, we're, whatever many of us, 6, 8, 9, depending on who's here, making decisions for a town of, roughly 7,000 people. It'd be great to have a lot more specific feedback from as much of that 7,000 as possible. Is what do they want?
We could read the last one we did, the last study we did a few years ago and get almost the same result that he got in Virginia's.
Yeah, and we've had a couple of surveys over the years. Natural resources and conservation types of things always come out very close to the top until it's next to somebody's house. Or, so it is, I think it's worth having an updated kind of survey, and maybe one that reaches out without, I don't know whether it's less credible if you do it informally when you go to Little League games and that sort of thing, but it may actually give you more of the information that you really want, because you can query people in a way that you can on a written survey.
Well, how about the idea of a survey or a project that proposes a survey and a series of focus groups? So you get that combination of the kind of hard numbers side and that softer human personal side.
With the focus being on,
Well, it would be on, well, I think to the extent that we're looking at, this would be another in a line of surveys. It's getting us the information that allows us to track over time some of the same issues we've done in the last 2 surveys. But then also, you're constrained when you're trying to ask some of those questions in a written survey format, that you can get into more detail or get a more full response if you're just doing it in person, or not just doing it in person, but if you are doing it in person.
Yeah, the example he gave was that they really wanted to come up with this, trying to remember the term, but sort of historic Vermont village designation for part of Virgins there, and they went and talked to all the people that live there and the people who, visited that part of town. And they just talked about how it was so quaint and cute and so distinct and so classically Vermont. So they had all these quotes from tons of people, people who lived in the neighborhood, people who wished they could live in that neighborhood about what it made it. And then it was, so compelling to the, I guess in their case, they have a mayor and a
Mayor and
council,
city council.
that they were pretty much like, well, yeah, of course we're gonna approve this, because, you had 20, 30 different residents quoted by name specifically about what they had said about it and why they liked it. And that's just stuck with me since we had this talk about, just trying to get that kind of level of detail around some of these things that, we're bandying about up here, and I think we've got intelligent opinions, but we could come up with this great idea of hamlets, which I agree with 100%, but if most of the people that live out in the rural district, what do they like about being out there? What do they want it to continue to look like? What would change look like to them? It would be interesting to get the feedback from the people that are in that area.
Yeah, I mean, Jamie's not here to address it, although Kate, you were at the focus group that was done with some of the people for the form-based zoning that Brandy did downstairs, didn't you? Were you able to join us for part of that?
Oh, yeah, I was. Well, we were talking to the business
Yep.
owners, right?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was really good because
Yeah.
we heard from people
Well,
and they,
and those are wonderful opportunities to educate people who, you know, it's hard to get people to come to public meetings, it's hard to get them, to connect with them. And so if there can be a focus group on a particular topic item that, really catches somebody's fancy, that might be a way to kind of hook them and get them interested. I mean, I think also, the school kids are an underutilized opportunity. If you can get, there's the Building Museum in Washington DC, and they actually teach kids about planning and have them do little sort of exercises and drawings, and it's very hands-on. And, my brother's, first grader just came home from one of these things, and he was amazed at the level of stuff that they got into. So, I mean, we could maybe do some of that with the kids at our school. What do you think Shelburne should look like in 50 years,
I could imagine, I would talk to people that would have to help us with the budget, because that's a requirement of the grant application. But I'm crossing my fingers that we could do a legitimate survey and do somewhere on the order of 3 to 5 focus groups in this really serious way. I don't mean just like, well, let's just call some people and we get them and but to do them in a serious way, they would be facilitated. And I mean, I think that's the point of it, is that to make it well done. If that is a topic that we want. And
What about just getting $8,000 to extend Brandy's work? I mean, there's things there
on
that
form-based zoning,
Yeah, I had that
Yeah.
on my list, because there was stuff that we didn't get done, and that should,
And if we can ask for the 8,000, maybe, and then we don't have to.
Yep, that certainly, I mean, I think that was kind of embedded in one of the zoning bylaw amendment, that's at stormwater, so, yeah. Was it one of Jamie's? So anyway, it could be I have not convinced myself that going after the $8,000 as opposed to the full 20 really improves our chances of getting it. So if you're thinking, hey, let's save the 5,000 for the match, I don't know that it helps us get the grant.
So we could ask for the whole grant and maybe would that finish it up, or?
We have not, she and I have not had any of those discussions, so I don't know. But I'm looking for some direction. Is there a straw poll that anybody wants to take?
On what we feel for of these options, what we should.
Yeah, I mean, it's really something that, because it takes time to do it well, to try to settle on it now, if 2 more weeks really makes things tight with the select board and getting all the materials together.
I like the survey and focus groups, and that would be focused on what to do in the growth areas? Is that what we're thinking?
I don't know that we would have to answer the question of what those would be right now, but I think that knowing that it's that type of project gets me rolling.
Yeah.
And then we'll get back to details and we can work out that. in
Well,
the
I think
coming
everybody
weeks.
now is aware that we have a pretty big stormwater problem and that we have some challenges with resource protection. I think people get that. But what the implications of that in terms of how that suggests we should be living differently on the land, I think there's a huge disconnect there. And the education would be very helpful. And if it comes out that people want, the more complete streets, well, then what does that mean? That, how do we go about doing that? What changes to the character of the area are we willing to tolerate, and in what's, under what conditions? So I think the implications of this are, it would just be nice to not just always be talking about this, but actually be able to take some action.
Focus groups are a mechanism to be able to get better community feedback, something along those lines. I think that would address pretty much every topic that we've talked about in one way or another, if that's agreeable, and that would be enough to get the ball rolling. Is that something that?
I certainly support that. I think we can be a little bit more specific about like what topics you want to do the focus groups, but I think it could be, as you said, like it could be about green infrastructure, riparian conservation issues. It could be about energy issues that we talked about earlier today, or transportation, especially the proposals that you're pitching in your town plan that could be controversial, like complete streets idea, or kind of like these smart energy, smart connected communities idea. Renewable energy technologies that you're pitching. So having focus groups on these issues that state is pushing you to do, or regional planning commission is pushing you to do, but there is certain resistance in the town communities, or people are not clear about it. So you can like prioritize those 3-4 topics, and kind of that could be useful. There are also, by the way, smart cities websites where there are like portals, so you can put up, like engage the communities using those smart communities portals where people can give you real-time feedback on a variety of topics.
That's what I was rolling around, and I don't know what the challenges would be, but to have some sort of mechanism where we could have like a weekly or a monthly poll or question to the community that people
Yeah.
could answer or not, and there's
Yes,
a way to tie that
absolutely. So
back
you can
to
hire like
residents.
software programmers
Right.
on a consulting contract, and they can build out that kind of like portal for you, where you can ask these kind of questions and disseminate them through a variety of channels. And
Portage Forum, we almost don't need.
yeah, it's kind of like a real
It's like
on computing.
500 people.
That's true.
Yeah, there are a few different platforms.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
but you use front porch forum to promote the fact that
That
the
there's a
questions
thing
you're
to
asking,
happen,
and
right.
then driving them to a place that actually is
Right.
more of a, true survey.
So for this, if that's enough to get the ball rolling, and then we could fine tune it.
And, and that, I really like that idea, because one of my frustrations has been that I feel like we hear from the same people participate, and it's almost kind of predictable what the reactions are. And I feel like a lot of policy and decisions gets driven by the same people, and I'm one of them, right? I mean, I don't get what I want most of the time, but I'm out there promoting my point of view. But I just, what I really mean to say is we're not hearing from many people who have opinions or interests or desires, and we're not reaching them, we're not hearing from them, and we're the poorer because of it. And so, I think I really like the idea of getting more feedback and hearing from kids too. I mean, everybody should have a voice in this.
Absolutely.
And I will say, that just, comments made earlier about Shelburne having a lot of experts. There are some people who live in Shelburne who have been involved with prior surveys, and some of them are very, very knowledgeable. And so I'm going to, be reaching out to them to have them help me start to put this stuff together. And
Williams, is CBU soccer coach, girls soccer coach, and his teacher. He's been doing this, blanking on the name of it, but it's basically like he started it last year, where he got a bunch of the kids in the school district involved. In other words, how can we make education better? How can we make the schools better? And there's now a course he's teaching at CVU on kind of this idea. That was just struck me as, whether we could tap into that to sort of say, using this same subset of kids that are selected to want to be part of this idea, to say, all right, how can we make Shelburne better, or how can we keep Shelburne great?
we have a conduit right
Yeah.
Yeah, I might know a thing or two about my generation. Speaking on behalf of my generation, actually, at my school, I don't go to CBU, so I can't speak on that behalf. But I know certainly at the Vermont Common School, there's a huge emphasis. It's even in our mission statement that community awareness needs to be part of the education that's given. And that's why I initially came here, was because of what I've learned at Vermont Common School. And there's a research and service class that I think, now that we're talking about it, I'm starting to put together for a teacher. I know a specific teacher, actually, who would be very interested in kind of delving into what do we want to see in our communities, not just Shelburne specifically, that I think could really be beneficial for my generation to know about, because a lot of the people in my generation are kind of ignorant to what is happening at this level.
I absolutely love this conversation, and this is great, but in the interest of time, and I have a hard stop about 5 minutes ago, I'm realizing.
Oh my.
But I think, so you have enough to go for this one, and we can follow up. Can we move on to commissioner questions and comments? Are there any?
I have one.
All right.
I'm on a stormwater temporary commission to try to establish for the select board on how they are going to set up their utility, or are they going to have a utility? And it's mostly about funding, and it is going to happen. There is going to be a budget, no matter what we do or say. But we're sort of an advisory group to the select board, and the big question is, do we want to be a utility where and how do we want to collect money in it? Right now, the ballpark estimate is it would cost somebody around $35-40 a year, probably. But that's not the whole question. The question is, by doing a utility, everyone pays, as opposed to taxes, where 30% of the property is tax exempt. So that's one of the issues. But stormwater, there is going to be some sort of stormwater going on. And like
So you guys
form-based,
are considering parcel-based fees, or are those?
it's all up
those-
in the air right now. It's a discussion, and we're going to be meeting first and third Tuesday, I believe. I think our meetings are open, and we, like form-based zoning, we want to get it out so that people are talking about it. It's not a surprise. So that's all I have to say on that.
Cool. Anything else? Comments? All right, any
Only
other
other
business?
thing I was going to announce, I think I've sent emails to you all about the VLCT Town Fair. It's October 4 and 5 in Killington. If people are interested, want to sign up or something, let me know. Or
That was the, you said the
4th and 5th.
Wasn't it? Cool. All right, any other business? All right, well, now I'll take a motion to adjourn. Second? All right, moved by Dick. Sorry, I'm blanking. Graham. God, you even said hello earlier. Seconded by Graham. Thank you, everybody. This is a great discussion.
Aye.
Oh.